Okay, welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me well and see my screen properly. My name is Nancy Gariché and welcome to Self-Service Appsec as a Service. So I'm Nancy, and a few fast facts. I'm an OWASP member and an active volunteer as the co-chapter leader in my community in Ottawa, Canada, and also a project leader for the OWASP DevSlop project. If you haven't heard, it's DevSlop for Sloppy DevOps. We invite awesome folks from the community to chat with us and teach us something new on our YouTube channel about once or twice a month. So you should check it out. And my day job, I'm a public servant for the Government of Canada, where I'm currently the sole member of the Security Assessment and Authorization team. So what we do there, my role is to inform or brief the senior management on the risk they're taking by putting a system into production. And the last couple of years, I've been to my fair share of conferences on AppSec and DevOps and DevSecOps, and it's super exciting. And to see top performing companies, what they're doing in the space. However, it doesn't take long before I go back to work to realize that our practices are nowhere near what they're doing. So we're not FANG, the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So yes, you go to Appsec, California, and you hear about Netflix, Chaos Monkey, and chaos engineering, and it sounds cool, but you bring it back at work and it doesn't translate well. And people say, why would you even do that? And the reality is that there's no dedicated AppSec program. There's no AppSec lead or secure developer. There's no security architect. There's just an enterprise architect. There's no security engineer per se. There's developer and software engineer. You go into, to prove it, you can go into, I went into my directory and look for AppSec or application security. It's not in any job title or job description. But we're not alone. Like, even if companies have AppSec programs or an AppSec person, by BSEM, if you're not familiar, it's a quantitative study of the software security industry. It states that the average percentage ratio of software security to developer is 1.6%. So the burden of an AppSec program cannot solely fall on one or two individuals. So when I saw this tweet from secure coding expert Jim Manico, it hit close to home and made a lot of sense. So he says, from my experience, all software developers are now security engineer, whether they know it, admit to it, or do it. Your code is now the security of the organization you work for. So since the security team is clearly outnumbered by delivery teams, we needed to find a way to enable developers to move at their usual pace, so not be the bottleneck, while consistently providing tailored guidance when they needed it, which is as early as possible and throughout the software development lifecycle. So that is when the application security verification standard, ASVS, came into the picture. But let me back up a little. So I know that we're in an application security conference, and that since I'm presenting towards the end of the day, you've probably heard about OWASP by now, but let me just at least set the table so that if somebody stumbles into this talk and has a bit of context. So OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project. It's an international nonprofit powered by brilliant volunteers that dedicated to providing free tools, free projects, free guidance on all about building secure software. And what I'd like to discuss today is how, as a governance, risk, and compliance individual contributor, so GRC, not an AppSec specialist, I was able to leverage some of OWASP projects and other non-OWASP open source projects to help secure our SDLC, software development lifecycle. Okay, so there are quite a few, hundreds of projects within OWASP, but I'll go over 4 that are flagship. You probably know about the OWASP Top 10, the most popular, the most well-known. It's been around for about a decade, reviewed every 3 years, focuses on the most critical risk of web application. It has definitely a lot of important information in it within the documentation, but it's not an exhaustive list of risk and vulnerabilities of what you need to do. It's an awareness document. The goal is not to provide a checklist. As soon as you do these 10 things, you have an application that's secure. right? I'll be a little bit dramatic here, but I compare it to the WHO, the World Health Organization top 10 causes of death, right? Like it scares you enough, you see heart disease, stroke, and cancers. So it scares you enough to understand that taking care of your health is important if you don't want to drop dead, but it doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't give you a health and fitness plan. So OWASP top 10, to go back to that, is a brief overview of the do's and don'ts of web application security. But then that's when the proactive controls comes to the rescue, I guess. So that document focuses on what to do. It doesn't focus on the vulnerabilities and the risk, but what an engineering team should do to proactively address security. I think, in my opinion, it's a much better approach. I wish it was a project that was more popular than the other top 10. You'll notice that each category starts with a verb, right? Like define security requirement, enforce access control. So it really encourages you to take action. It's still, however, an awareness document. It's a structured guide to take security more seriously. It's a skeleton. I used it as a skeleton for our application security program while it was being built. But it doesn't provide enough details to support the whole program. It needs a bit more meat. So I guess I can show you. So for each control, there's a description of the control. There's an implementation best practices on how to implement this control. And it also has a brief summary of the vulnerabilities that it can prevent. But what's important is, and what I like about it, there's reference to how to actually implement that control. So references and tools that you can help it integrate into your SDLC. So if I said there was not enough meat in the proactive control, where do you find that? That would be in the OWASP ASVS. So ASVS is a list of security requirements divided into 14 categories. It's a detailed overview of the application security do's and don'ts of web application security, web application. And because not all applications need the same level of protection, ASVS established 4 levels of security verification. So ASVS level 1 is for a low assurance level application that don't need that much less protection. ASVS level 2 is for application that contains sensitive data and requires protection and is recommended for most application. And ASVS level 3 is for the most critical applications. To think HIPAA, I guess PCI DSS, like high value transaction, sensitive medical data. It provides a higher level of trust. And I think it's worth noting that there's 136 more requirements in level 2 than in level 1. So you don't want to assign all the controls to all your application the same way. It helps you, the level helps you prioritize and understand, and you need to understand your application before you make that kind of decision. Okay, so again, great. We have security requirements. SVS is great. I don't know if you've read other frameworks, controls from other frameworks or control catalog like NIST 853 or ITSG 33 in Canada, but those are pretty painful to read and sometimes you can barely understand what they want from you. So in a few sentences, each control in ASVS tells us what to do, what we need to achieve, but still doesn't always give you enough details on how to get there. And for that, within the document, it actually maps some of the control back to the proactive control, to CWE, and to the cheat sheets, the OWASP cheat sheets, where you have more detailed information. So I took all that information from the cheat sheet, the SVS, and the proactive control, and we attacked and recruited a more senior engineer, software engineer, to go through all these controls. So we attacked the SVS one control family at a time. So I call V1, for example, a control family. And as you can see in each control, there's a number in parentheses, and that's the amount of controls that is in that control family. So I would go through that one by one and remove the ones that are not relevant to us. And the ones that remain, we would add detailed description to each control. So we wrote, like, when it needed it, a clearer definition of what needed to be done, and a definition of done, right? In the context, and what's important, in the context of our organization and in the context of the tooling that we were using. And also in a language that a developer and not only an auditor would understand. So that was the bulk of the work. So massaging those controls was the bulk of the work. So how would I, without the experience in all of those categories, be able to write those guidance? That's what I mentioned, was using at the end of each of the family, of the control family in ASVS, you have a reference to other documentation, either within OWASP or even outside of OWASP, that can help you understand how to implement it. So after I wrote the first draft, I went back to the senior developers, and the question I kept asking were questions like, does that even make sense to you? Or if this was assigned to you, would you have all the information you need to get this done? Because it was, again, to the name of the presentation, self-service. I really wanted them to be able to use that information and be able to go without having to go back to the security team or anybody else for doing their job. And in our definition of done and the proposed solution and the documentation, we focused on making sure to make it as easy as possible for the developer to be successful. So if reusable secure codes, a reusable secure code snippet was the solution, that code snippet was right there in the description. So, and getting a senior developer involved in writing all this was not only to have a sanity check of the information that was written, but also it was a crucial step to changing the culture and making sure that the engineering team owned the process. So I'm here to help. I'm here to do the research. I can research the how out of a topic, but ultimately they were making the key implementation decisions. Okay, so what's next? So we had a nice catalog of controls that were clear, appropriate for our environment. So another challenge that we were faced with was, like I said earlier, not all applications need to be protected the same way, right? We don't apply the control systematically to all the applications. So we needed a way to classify our application properly and then be able also to assign these controls to team members specifically for accountability and also to keep track of the progress. So the questionnaire. So I recycled the idea. It's not a brand new idea from a bunch of non-OWASP open source project. What comes to mind is Mozilla. Mozilla has the rapid risk assessment, RRA, and security checklist that has good question in it that inspired our questionnaire. There's also Google's vendor security assessment questionnaire that was helpful. And more recently, we discovered the Seek's Listo open source project. And that's the one I'll be walking through. So we created our own questionnaire based on these questions, taking that as an example. And we wanted to make sure that it didn't take much more than half an hour to an hour for a team to complete, the leadership of the team to complete and gather just enough information about the project in order to automatically assign the proper control. So the questionnaire helped us in 4 ways. First, we were able to gather the project details, so contact information, what does it actually do, get a good understanding of the application and what it does. And then the second part is statement of sensitivity. We call it the SOS, or in Listo, it's called the risk assessment, but it's understanding what would be the impact on the CIA, the impact on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability to that application. And the answers to these questions would help us make the decision if that was a level 1, level 2, or level 3 application. Then the third part is tools. Tools, I think there's a talk about this, the paved road. So those are the tools that within our organization that if a team decided to adopt, they know by default they were compliant to our best practice. So we're encouraging them to use the tools that are already approved to build their solution. So we keep track of that. And at the end, the last step is to customize. So that's the category of controls. And they had to go through all of them and figure out if that was something that was useful for their application. And the walkthrough will make that more clear. But basically, if they're doing authentication, we would add the authentication type controls. But if they're not authenticating during their in their application, then they're not selecting that control. Okay, so I guess that's the walkthrough. I'll go here. So I didn't ask for permission to share our internal tool, but I think it's a better idea to share Listo since it's open source and you can go back to it if that's something that you're interested in. So again, the questionnaire is a self-assessment. The team in the first part of their of the questionnaire provide as much information as possible about the project details. Who's the project lead? Here they ask for name, username, and Slack channel, but whatever information that you need. The second part is the risk assessment part, or what I called earlier the SOS, statement of sensitivity. So based on the question, how you answer these questions, it classifies your application as a low risk application, high risk application, or medium. So if I can go back, if I select yes to this question automatically, do you want supporting teams such as security and architecture to reach out throughout the project? And you say yes, it automatically puts that project into high risk. That's not the kind of question we ask. Our questions are more on the impact, like I said earlier, on the CIA, but that is definitely, you understand the concept, the concept that you ask the question that you need to, you ask the question so you get the answers that you need to be able to classify your application. Next is tool. That is the paved road that I was talking about. So those are the tools that's within Seek, the open source project that they're using. And if they select one of these tools, means it imports the controls, the appropriate controls into the project, but it also imports them as complete because they are compliant by default with the best practices of the organization. And then module. That's where you would put the categories of the family controls. Like I was saying earlier, if here the question is, does your code authenticate or authorize users, tokens, sessions, or other? If it's yes, you would click it. And then you see that there's number 60 to 6. Those are the 6 security requirements that will be imported into that into that project. But if you don't do that within your application, that you don't need to select it and it's not imported at the end. So I just selected that one as an example. And then at the end is the summary. Listo, once you submit, imports those controls into a Trello board, into a project management software. Here it's Trello. Within our organization, we use Jira to track that kind of thing. So our questionnaire would import those requirements into Jira and would be assigned to the project lead, who would then assign it to their team. And we were able to keep track of what's going on. So the last part of it all, once the controls are assigned to a project, they have 4 choices, right? 4 status choice. If they're able to implement it as it is recommended within the control, then it can be classified, the status is done. If they want to do it, but later on, not before it goes to production, then they would put it as deferred, but provide a comment and informing us of the timeline. If they realize that the controls that we've put in is not applicable to their situation, they would have to put it as not applicable, but also comment it. And will not implement is for the controls that basically they decided not to implement and they're basically accepting the risk. So this is an important part because the artifacts of the whole process is an input into the risk quantification exercise that we do at the end to inform senior management if we want if they want, if they're comfortable to go live or to go into production with these applications. So that's the last step. So here are the references of pretty much everything I've mentioned. Obviously, OWASP.org has all the documentation of the projects that I've mentioned. If you like watching talks on YouTube, if you type ASVS plus one of these names, Germanico, Philippe Derick, Josh Grossman, or Derek Fisher, those are talks that helped me understand and that were helpful for me to follow their example. Also, back in the fall of 2019, that's less known, but Andrew van der Stock, which is, I believe, a project leader of ASVS, held a training that I attended, a 3-day training on ASVS. And he went through the result of that training was a slide deck. I think there's about 300 slides. And I think I'll try to show that to you as well. Sorry. Okay, yeah, here. So for example, for that control, verify the use of, you not only have the definition of that control, but you also have recommended solution and unit tests that you can do to validate that control and architecture review. So that was a good source of information for adding information into each control. And that you can find in the GitHub for ASVS in their presentation. And lastly, Seek's Listo tool, it's open source. If you Google that, they also have a GitHub repo for that. I think it's a good way to start with ASVS to get something started. So that's it for me. If you have more questions, I don't have an online presence right now, but I have an OWASP.org email. You can reach me there. And I'm also on the OWASP Slack workspace as Nancy Gariché. So that's it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me a message. Take care.